welcome to another edition of 15 Minutes of Flame. I'm Robert Phoenix, and today is a show that's going to be dedicated in some ways to the notion and subject of loss, and particularly the death of Justine Damond. And we're going to get into that a little bit this morning. And some of the players and the particulars around her untimely passing at the age of 40. We're going to talk about that today. And it bears our witnessing for a number of different reasons. And I'll try to get into that as deeply as possible here today. Another passing that I'd like to recognize here is the passing of John Major Jenkins. And ironically, I was talking about John Major Jenkins probably about 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago. And, I was doing a riff about the Mayan calendar and what happened on 12/21/12 and what didn't happen. And I think it was the riff was primarily about like David Bullock and the cosmogenesis and that whole trip. And I think I was talking about bringing in Jenkins and his role in the run-up to 2012, and how there were, the kind of the big players. There was Jose Arguelles and there was John Major Jenkins, and the two of them had a terrible feud. And of course, Carl Kalaman and the other, player to some extent was Wilcock. And I asked the question, it's like, well, where's John Major Jenkins been since 2012, and what does he do for kind of the next act in his life? And the answer, it came to me last week. He died. He had some form of cancer, and I just wanted to bring it out and talk about it briefly, and honor somebody who was doing a lot of work. And, it's really easy to sit on the sidelines and say, well, this person is a shill, or this person doesn't get it, or this person is treading in shallow water. And I think sometimes in our flea-like awareness and our inability to really wrap our heads around something at a much deeper level at times, just because of the medium. I mean, look what I do. I'm on here for 30 minutes or 30 minutes plus each day, and I try to burn through as many topics as possible and keep it light, spontaneous, and fun, so that, in some very unusual times, you can understand kind of what's going on and have this almost pre-digested in some ways. But it happens in a very short period of time. So it's not like we're doing 90-minute segments every single day on the same topic and drilling down and drilling down and drilling down so you're completely informed. And I do my best to grab it and build on something and then churn and then go to something else. And unfortunately, it's kind of the sign of our times. And so here we are 5 years after 2012, and two of the major players out of sort of the big four are gone. And Jenkins' work was primarily around the culture of the Maya at that time, and what these cycles and the Baktun and all this stuff meant. And he was not into the wildly predictive scenario of what happens after the end of time. And because we're such a millennialist culture, that we were all sort of looking for that peace, and whether it's the rapture or whether it's the whatever it is, revelation, it's all kind of inbred. It's all in our DNA that we come to this end point. And after that end point, well, who knows what takes place. Anyway, he wasn't necessarily into that, and as a result was defending, probably more classical principles. Anyway, wherever you are, you're there now in the same space, in no space, no time, with Jose Arguelles. So whatever beef you guys had, well, I guess you get to figure it out on the other side, if that's indeed the case. So just a special mention to John Major Jenkins, a major contributor to the culture and the cosmology of life on Earth pre-12/21/12. Now, not to continue to go down this path of mortality, but it bears another level of witnessing today that there was something pretty tragic that happened in Minnesota. It's kind of mind-blowing, to be honest with you. You read these things, we read these things like, oh my, here's another instance of somebody being killed or somebody being, potentially even sacrificed on some level. When you look into some of these deaths, whether they're, doesn't matter what skin tone these deaths occur under, they're not only strange, but they're also chilling in a lot of ways. And we really have to kind of scratch our heads, like what world are we living in, and how did we get here so rapidly in some ways? The story I'm about to read to you is almost it's almost off the pages of some sort of dystopian novel. And I'm sure you're well informed now that Justine Damond, who was an Australian woman living in Minnesota, Minneapolis to be specific, where Philando Castile was killed, was shot for calling the police because she thought that there was a disturbance that needed to be looked at, investigated. If you're not familiar with the story, I'm going to read you. This is from I'm going to read you the New York Daily News version of it, and then I'm going to read you kind of another version coming off of Fox. So this is another layer here. Is this guy was Somali? He's a Somali American, so he's one of these dudes that was probably one of the Lost Boys. I can't make that claim, but he's about the same age as kind of an older version of the Lost Boy. And the Lost Boys were these kids that were running around Somalia eating bark and eating ants, and they were the byproduct of a brutal civil war. Anyway, let's get into this. The Minneapolis cop who fatally shot an Australian woman during a police call was celebrated as one of the department's few Somali Americans, but had 2 open complaints against him and been named in a recent lawsuit. His name was Mohammed Noor, and he fired at Justine Damond on Saturday night while she was speaking to the officer's partner. Okay, so here we are. Now, Damond, who had moved from Australia in 2015, had called the police to report an assault. This incident has now sparked international outrage. Noor and his partner, identified as Matthew Harity, hadn't turned on their body cameras. Now, this is a big deal, according to reports, and have since been put on administrative leave. This is real. This is not fake news. This is not some kind of false flag. We're talking an event that took place. Minneapolis officials hailed Noor as the first Somali American officer in the department's 5th police precinct, which covers the southwestern part of the city. I want to take a moment to recognize Officer Mohammed Noor, the newest Somali officer in Minneapolis Police Department. Mayor Betsy Hodges wrote in a Facebook post last year. Okay, so he was honored by the mayor. Officer Noor has been assigned to the 5th precinct, where his arrival has been highly celebrated, particularly by the Somali community in and around Carmel Mall. So now we're bringing in the Somali community, which is pretty big, in Minneapolis. Noor, 31, joined the police department in 2015, having previously worked in property management in Minneapolis and St. Louis. He got a degree in business administration, management, and economics from Augsburg College in Minneapolis, the newspaper reported. I think it's highly unusual that somebody who has a degree in business administration, management, and economics is now a cop, and how they must feel about something like that. Noor has since hired a lawyer, Thomas Plunkett, who said in a statement that Noor moved to the U.S. at a young age and found his calling as a cop. He is one of the 9 Somali Americans on the 840 police force, according to the Star Tribune. Since he joined the department, 3 complaints have been filed against Noor, 2 of which remain open. According to the city's Office of Police Conduct Review, it wasn't immediately clear what those complaints were for. Noor was also one of 3 officers named in a lawsuit filed by on Friday, filed by a Minnesota woman on May 25th. So we're talking roughly about 2 months ago. Noor was one of 3 officers who responded to the home of Teresa Graham, who called the police several times that day. Graham, whose relatives said she had mental health issues, claimed in the lawsuit police were trying to take her away as a retaliation for her earlier complaints. They entered her home despite her request for them to leave. The 2 officers grabbed her by the arms, according to the 14-page complaint. Now, Noor took Graham's phone from her hand and then grabbed her right wrist and upper arm, thereby immobilizing her. Graham claimed she pleaded to be let go, having recently suffered a shoulder injury. Noor lessened the tightness of his grip on her right arm, but the police sergeant holding her left arm tightened his hold, the lawsuit claimed. Now, Damond was born Justine Ruszczyk, and before taking her fiance's last name ahead of their nuptials, so they're getting married, and she's taking his last name, called the police Saturday night to report a possible sexual assault behind her home. So what she's basically calling is perhaps somebody getting raped. She was in her pajamas when the police cruiser, driven by Harity, arrived at the scene. The officers were speaking with Damond when Noor fired across Harity, hitting the 40-year-old woman in the abdomen. The shooting sparked outrage, particularly because the officers' body cameras were not on. Noor extends his condolences to the family and anyone else who has been touched by this event. He takes their loss seriously, keeps them in his daily thoughts and prayers. His attorney said in a statement, well, that's wonderful. He takes these events very seriously because for him, being a police officer is a calling. Maybe he should have had a different calling. And whose calling? Where was the calling emanating from? I don't want to get snide here, but can you see that there's this level of malpractice and somebody who seems eminently overqualified for being a police officer with a degree in economics? The state's Bureau of Criminal Apprehension has taken over the investigation. Tonight, I'm sad and disturbed, Hodges wrote in a Facebook post on Sunday. This is a tragedy for the family, for a neighborhood I know well, and for our whole city. My thoughts and with the family and the community. Thoughts are wonderful, but they don't bring somebody back. This is a tragic event, and I'm not going to go out. I put this up on Facebook yesterday, and every now and then I tap into a post that taps into people's feelings in a big way, gets pretty viral. People share it, people comment on it. There's a sense of either outrage or at times relating to whatever it is I'm posting. It doesn't happen all the time, but this was one of those posts. And the overall feeling was, number one, anger. Number two, it was duly noted that he was a foreign national, and so there was this other sentiment that this guy had a different kind of relationship with the place, with the people, with the culture. And what's ironic is that he killed somebody from another country. So there are 2 people from other countries that were involved in this tragedy here on this soil. And it's tragically ironic. But and look, I'm not being an Islamic apologist and say, well, it could have been any cop. Look, there are some people who come from whether it's this country or from other parts of the world, where they bring their trauma into a situation, and their trauma, their personal history, their past is probably not the best for their chosen occupation. Let's put it that way. And I don't know the personal history of this Muhammad Noor, but I'm telling you, it's a bad story. It's a bad story all the way around. This woman was 40 years old. She was part of a spiritual community, and I think she might have been a yoga instructor, if I'm not mistaken, and had everything in front of her. This is what the son, Zach Damond, said. Basically, my mom's dead because a police officer shot her for reasons I don't know. She was an Australian national instructor of the Lake Harriet spiritual community and was engaged to be married in August and has a son, according to Fox News. Her fiance, identified by the Minneapolis Star Tribune as Don Damond, was reportedly on his way home from a business trip. Damond, whose maiden name is Ruschik, but went by her fiance's last name, called police, hearing a sound in a nearby alley, according to their son, Zach Damond, 22. He says, "I demand answers. If anybody can help, just call police and demand answers. I'm so done with all this violence." Minneapolis Mayor Betsy Hodges, at a press conference Sunday, called the shooting tragic. She released a lengthy statement urging people to be as patient as information on the shooting is being released. This is so. One of the things that, again, when I hate to say this, but I'm going to begin to go off the reservation a bit here. Have we been conditioned and so hardened, or at least have I been conditioned and so hardened, that when I hear about an event like this, I think, well, there's something else at play. Maybe because the body cams are off, that perhaps this might have been some kind of a setup, that there is some other, something else at play, for whatever reason, that it basically takes a specific narrative. And again, I'm not being an Islamic apologist. I do my best to call it as I see it, and I think Islam has been weaponized, and I think it's been weaponized to the point where it's taken on its own identity, and now we're having to deal with it. But if we look at, say, something that happened in South Carolina, Columbia, South Carolina, in Dillon Roof, which is a completely different situation, but we have to bring it into context here and look at that and say, well, this is, really what was going on with Dillon Roof was forwarding an agenda, and that agenda is being played out right now all throughout the South. But why can't we look at this from the same context or angle? And should we even do that? Because we've done this again and again and again with these scenarios that look, for all intents and purposes, like they're real, and we scratch and go underneath the surface, and they don't appear to be as real as the headlines. And I'm not saying that this is one of them, but because we have trained ourselves to some degree to look at these things with a bit of a jaundiced view, that it kicks in. And I'm not saying it's right, or I'm not saying it's wrong. It is now part of the response that takes place. But let's just put that over on the side, just for a moment. Just for a moment. And just deal with the facts at hand, that somebody with a promising life ahead of them is gone, if that is indeed the case, and the circumstances and the details around it are not whole, not good. Now, what's interesting, and I'm not saying that these two things are connected. What a lot of times what happens, we'll take one event and we'll transpose it and we'll connect it to another event. But I couldn't help but also notice that at the same time, there was this satanic. Oh, here we go. Who's driving the cruiser. Okay, there's more evidence here coming up now on the death of Justine Damond. But what I wanted to bring up was that there was this demonstration that was going on in Minneapolis about this satanic monument. And it was happening right around the same time. And these satanic monuments are popping up all over the country. It started, I believe, in Oklahoma City, if I'm not mistaken. And then they've been sort of popping up in other places like Arizona, and I think one of the latest now is Minneapolis. And it is a classic black Saturn cube with a pentagram and a war helmet. It's a satanic monument to veterans is what it is. And what these Satanists have been doing is they've been taking on free speech laws and freedom of expression laws. So if you can have the Ten Commandments in a public square, well, we can have a satanic monument in a public square. And based on, of course, the laws, rules, and statutes of the country, they're entitled to it. Now, what's interesting about that is that in some cases, the Ten Commandments or a statue of Moses or whomever, and I'm not being an advocate for those things, but they're taken down. They're taken down in many instances. So there's this strange transposition and juxtaposition that's taking place. Now, I'm not, again, making a connection with that this thing that happened with Justine Damond and the protest against this veterans monument in Minneapolis are linked, but in a strange way they kind of are. And we've gotten so used to looking at what happens as a sacrifice. Like River Phoenix, for instance. Here we are, October 31st, Halloween, in front of the Viper Room. Sacrifice. And this network of sacrificial deaths and occurrences that take place all around the globe on consistent days, right? Days that matter, days that mean something. Is this the case? I don't know. I don't know if it's the case at all. But clearly there is an interesting space-time relationship between the two. And at the bottom line is that there's something very dark that went on in Minneapolis. And if that's the case, then we need to pay attention to this, because ultimately all lives matter. I got into this, when the Ferguson stuff went down and the Freddie Gray stuff went down, and we looked at where these police officers, or how the police officers were being trained, what's taken place since 9/11, with all this money that's gone into DHS, or these police departments are given money to go to Israel and train with the IDF. And they train with the IDF, and then they come back, and then they bring their methodologies to the various police departments around the country. And there is a clear paper trail of this. And that ideology tends to be shoot first, because that's part of the technique and the overall policing philosophy that they're being trained in. And so what we're seeing here is the kind of the Gazification of the United States. And I've talked about this before. Now, I haven't looked into Minneapolis, where if they were part of the same program. I'm just telling you in general that this is what's taking place. So here we are, another difficult moment with somebody who theoretically was getting ready to partake in a new life. Let's look at, here it is, the hundreds of Catholics protest the statue, the satanic statue. This is from July 16th. So this is right around the same time that Justine Damond was killed. You can go to rt.com and you can look this up. It's a satanic statue, Minnesota Park. And this was Saturday's protest. Saw droves of protesters sing and pray while holding placards that read, "Satan is evil, evil has no rights. Honk against Satan, and Satan takes souls to hell." Veterans Memorial Park in Belle Plaine, southwest Minneapolis. And so they have this cube, this black Saturn cube, with the downward-facing pentagram and the soldier's helmet that's cast in, looks like metal, right on top of the black cube. And this was going on. This was going on. Wow. Right around the same time. Again, I'm not making any sort of connection, like, hey, we're going to protest this and we're going to take this woman out as a result of the protest. These things don't work that way. So sometimes they're just darkly metaphysical. All right, let's find out what's happening here. This is from the Gateway Pundit, and they're reporting on this. And it says Somali-American police officer Mohammed Noor shot Aussie Justine Damond this past weekend, or Damond rather. So I'm just trying to. Noor's partner was described as stunned by the shooting. Reported that Damond made the 911 call. This is all what we know already. So the anti-Muslim contingency is out in force, and there's a picture of Noor standing inside of a Somali store with 3 Somali women and a man in the background. Oh boy. Bottom line is this woman's dead, and it's not a good story at all. There's other things happening, and I guess we should pay some attention to them. Before we do that, I want to just give a shout out to Joe, who is a regular listener to the show and has been for a long time. Wish you a happy birthday. I'm going to try to honor more birthdays here. We talk about death and tragedy sometimes, and sometimes it's good to honor life because it is such a precious, precious, precious commodity that we share amongst us. Who else has a birthday today? Let's see who we've got. Mel Foster, happy birthday to you. Joe, yesterday, wish you a happy birthday. Soul Return, Shane Bullis. He doesn't listen to the show, but he's interesting. Happy birthday, Shane. And Ananda Das. This guy used to post a lot of interesting stuff to my Facebook page. He was one of these conscious, sort of Vedic people. One of the Das brothers, the Das Mafia. Anyway, he had some great posts. Bianca Childs, wishing you a happy birthday, happy soul return, and Kate Hockett as well. Let's try to do this a little bit more. Do our best to honor life as we look at and talk about and comment on deconstruction and chaos, and it's sometimes this very serious matter of people losing their lives. There's more going on in the world, a lot more. Do we want to get into it? Do we want to start to stack it a little bit? We have to kind of clear the decks. Let's just go through this in rapid succession. John McCain is getting his brain worked on. Just as the vote for the health care bill comes up, Kane exits stage left. This is triggering a bit of a domino effect, as Republicans are going to be absent in many instances as it relates to the tortured, embattled, ragged health care known as the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare. They've been working on a replacement model. Now, Mitch McConnell says, let's just repeal it, and we'll get to it later. This is I don't know where this is going to put us. If they manage to vote on this and they repeal it, I'm sure it will go back to some level of what it was prior to Obamacare, which will be a bit of a mess. Look, there are people out there, and I know them, who have some very serious issues that they can't let go and say, let's junk this. Richard's son, who's been on my show, really great guy, super talented, fantastic musician. If you love ambient music, electronic music, check out his music. It's fantastic. He has two older children. They're in their mid to late teens, and they're severely autistic. And if he doesn't have, and I was never an advocate of Obamacare, but we've been on this now, and his kids have been able to get medicine and care and help that they've needed because they have autism. And if it gets repealed, the amount of money that he's going to have to put out for his kids to get taken care of is significant. And I was listening to an interview last night with Russell Blaylock on Battle Knoll Radio. It's a good interview. It's funny. Blaylock seems slightly annoyed to be on the show at times, but these guys are hungry. They're hungry for the truth. I love them. I think they're great, especially Nathan Lawrenson. I've talked about Battle Knoll Radio. These guys are bulldogs, and they had Russell Blaylock on, and Blaylock understands the dangers of vaccines like almost no other doctor. And he was lining it up on this interview and basically saying, look, we don't understand completely the dangers of what these vaccines are bringing to our lives. And he was connecting vaccines with things like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and even ALS. That those strains, those maladies are in the vaccines. They're in the thimerosal. They're in the aluminum, which sets up shop in our brain. And as we get older, these materials begin to degrade more, and they begin to interpenetrate the brain-blood barrier even more, and we have these absolutely horrific later in life conditions. And he points the scope on the rifle clearly at vaccines. Anyway, I just wanted to bring that up because it's a really good interview, and you can get the sort of the 40,000 foot Reader's Digest version of it. But I'm bringing it up also because of the challenge that Richard's children are going to go through, because we had this bill, Obamacare, which was shoved down our throats. Nobody read it. Nancy Pelosi said, let's pass it and then read it later. We have to do this, we have to do this, we have to do this. And Obama was the guy that it was going to get done on his watch. And I'm going to speak frankly in this moment, because if you didn't vote for it, what would you be considered? You'd be considered racist. Obama was the secret weapon for Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act. And yes, some people have been helped by it. I'm trying to be as clear and as clinical as possible, but at the proverbial end of the day, the costs were soaring. There was no competition, and this idea that we would get universal health care at a very affordable rate, it's ridiculous. The insurance companies helped write Obamacare because they were always going to profit, and their profits were going to go up exponentially as time went on. And that has nothing to do with things like the death panels and the degradation of care for people as they got older. I mean, it has nothing to do with any of that. We're just looking at it from the perspective of a business model. And the American people who were clamoring for better health care, or let's reframe that, better health, were, and a lot of them were in support of it. I was not, because ultimately, what did it come down to? It came down to being a tax. That's how they were able to essentially legalize Obamacare. They turned it into a tax. It was a mandate. And it's such an ironic piece, right? It's like, okay, well, there's a certain group of people that say, leave my body alone. Don't touch my body. My body's my body. And that real estate, that personal real estate, theoretically would only exist for that group of people. But when it came to other people, said, look, leave my body alone, leave my taxes alone, let me take care of myself. And that is, you can't, that's not even part of the discussion. In fact, that's not even part of the discussion when we get into things like vaccines. It's not part of the discussion, and it should be. Look, we know that our environment is one of the greatest culprits of dis-ease, and that's a fact. At least in my world, it's a fact. You know, we're dealing with, again, we talk about this almost every single day, all of the radicals, the free radicals, what's in our skies, what's in our drinking water, what's in our food. You know, 80% of the population can't even eat wheat anymore because of the glyphosate that is used to basically desiccate the wheat, crack the hull open, and ensure a faster process of getting the wheat into a manageable form where they can create some form of flour or whatever out of it, right? I mean, so, it's pervasive, it's everywhere. Healthcare is not the biggest issue. It is the environmental impact of health in our foods. And every single piece of nature that we touch, that's the issue, which is rarely, if ever, addressed. And why is that? Because those conditions that are brought on by the degradation of our food and our water and our environment, it turns out that those things are actually really good for Big Pharma. It keeps them employed. It keeps pharmaceutical reps driving around the country in brand new cars that are company cars, fleets that are sold from Ford and Chevy, Chrysler, GM, Toyota, so that the reps can use the company cars and go from office to office to office to talk about and inform clinicians, doctors, nurses, head nurses about the latest and greatest advances in modern medicine so that they can treat these conditions that really could be treatable at a very different level if we reclaimed our food, we reclaimed our water, we reclaimed our skies. You get down to that level, and all of a sudden, all that money that's set aside for drugs and trials and testings and payouts and all the other bullshit that goes along with it, that stuff shrinks because now we've got a populace that's healthy. And let me tell you, man, health is one of the biggest things. And you know it and I know it. It's important. It's vital. You don't have your health, you're screwed. I don't care how much money you have. It's just a fait accompli at that point. Now, McCain's surgery is more serious than thought. At first it was he's just got something wrong with his eye. Now there's something going on with his brain. I'll have to take a look at his chart. I think he's a Virgo, if I'm not mistaken. I'll have to take a look at that. But there's a lot more going on. Wow, so there's a Monmouth poll that says 40% now support impeaching Trump. I don't think Trump is going to make it past the eclipse, or if he does, it's not going to be too. I think there's going to be some serious issues around Trump and Donald Trump Jr. I think they fell prey to a honey trap, and I think that, like, if you look at the eclipse and you look at where the sun is going to be, it's going to be right on. It's at right on Trump's ascendant. It'll be at 28 degrees. It's 28 degrees Leo. So it's going to be right on his ascendant. And what does Leo rule? It rules children. Children. And Trump, it's Trump's firstborn son. It's his firstborn, right? I mean, Donald Trump Jr. is his firstborn. I believe it goes Donald Trump Jr., Ivanka, Eric, and the other one. I always forget her name because she doesn't hang around. Marla Maples' daughter, and then there's Barron, but Donald Trump Jr. is the firstborn, and it almost appears as if there's going to be some almost quasi-religious sacrifice involved here, and Trump may step down because of what could happen to his children. You know, I was watching a video yesterday with Judge Joe Napolitano. Now, Napolitano has been a real firebrand on the Fox side of things and has been an advocate for basically Trump and truth and, you know, blowing past political correctness, which is a mind lock. And on this interview, he's basically saying, hey, look, you know, because of the nature of what happened in the passing of documents, that Donald Trump Jr. should be investigated. Now, this is a real departure for Fox and a real departure for Napolitano. And if you're the left, you're listening to this, and all of a sudden you're thinking, well, look, here's somebody really with it on the right, somebody who's, you know, into the truth, into investigation and due process. And that may actually be the case, because we can't always have it both ways. We can't always have it both ways. But it also bears sort of witnessing that Napolitano is coming off of a suspension. And Fox is headed in kind of a new direction. So, but at the very least, you know, he's quoting significant pieces of law that make it pretty clear that Donald Trump Jr. was involved with something that he shouldn't have been involved with, at least based on what Napolitano has brought to the surface. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. We got the eclipse coming up, and remember, Leo represents children. So if something's going to go down around the eclipse on the 21st, about a week and a half before, a week and a half after, I'm going to go on record and say it's related to his kids, Donald Trump's kids. Anyway, we've got a 40% rate according to the Monmouth poll now supporting impeachment for Trump. Here's a really interesting factoid. Susan Rice apparently backs out of Tuesday testimony before the House panel. She abruptly backs out. We can't get anybody now to appear before a House panel. It's almost impossible. The only way that people can appear is they have to be put on a grand jury. And with a grand jury, you're subpoenaed, and if you don't show up, you go to jail. And if you do show up, you can refuse to answer questions. You can take the fifth, but the fifth will land you in jail as well. So Susan Rice has backed out, decides that she doesn't want to be part of the panel. By the way, she's worth $50 million. Her average salary is $172,000. She's worth $50 million. How does that happen? And by the way, that's bipartisan. A lot of people make a lot of money in Washington, D.C. Once they get in. A lot of it has to do with the fact that they get to do inside trading. We've talked about that before. Let's see what else we have. There's a lot sort of bubbling up underneath the surface here. The other thing is there's like a lot happening in Israel right now, because apparently they're starting to build the third temple. There's been a huge amount of violence around Gaza. Israel's building an island off Gaza. China's helping them. The world we're living in is accelerating at such a rapid rate that the world we lived in is in the rearview mirror in the blink of an eye. An absolute blink of an eye. And we're sitting here and we're watching the sea change every single day. It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And yet, again, just like we talked about on Friday's show, we have to live our lives, keep things moving in one direction to the best of our ability. Let me give you one more, quick piece here. This is about the end of cash, and Visa is offering huge amounts of money for businesses to go cashless. Huge amounts of money. They're offering restaurants up to $500,000 to process all their transactions without any money. Well, money, but of course, no cash, no green pieces of paper. So that's happening. That's bubbling up beneath the surface, and we're living through these changes. And it's, again, if you just step back and you just kind of watch the show, it's kind of mind-blowing. It's really kind of mind-blowing. Watching our reality be reconstructed before our very eyes. Deconstructed and reconstructed before our very eyes. It's like that movie Dark City. You go to sleep at night and the world changes and you wake up and there's a whole new city and a whole new series of memories that go along with it and are associated with it. Well, again, we kind of run full circle here. You get what the sort of the news of the day is, the big picture. And how do you deal with it? Again, this really comes down to tools, strategies. One of the things that I'm doing my best during this time of the month of Cancer, which we're getting ready to transit out of very quickly and go into the sign of Leo, is I have been taking stock of my life. I've been taking stock of the people in my life. I've been taking stock of those relationships and trying my best to slow down, get more analog, so that I'm not on to the next thing and on to the next thing and on to the next, because it gets so easy to get so wound up. And we're, operating almost like automatons in our own way. So I'm an advocate of slowing it down to the best of your ability, and today, at the very least, as we witness what happened with the sudden and tragic death of Justine Damond and the passing of John Major Jenkins, who played a pretty crucial role in understanding what happened with the Maya and his works and cosmogenesis and all the stuff that went along with it, and the great kind of battles that he had with Jose Arguelles, who's gone as well. To understand that both of these lives, whether they touch you personally or not, are gone, and they touch somebody in their own way, whether it was scholarship and debate, sometimes ego, or whether it was somebody who was doing their best to have a life here. When we encounter these moments, when we encounter this spirit of transformation and passing, it hits us. And it's a really good time, I think, as we get ready to enter into this eclipse energy. Because it's not just Trump, it's the country and it's the world that is going to go through this portal of the eclipse. So let's take stock and let's connect and let's, analog each other a bit. All right. This is Robert Phoenix. You've been listening to 15 Minutes of Flame, clocking in at 48 minutes today. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to stay open. So the one challenge with doing radio on your phone. Have a great Tuesday.